What's going on, everybody, and welcome into the 136th episode of the Crazy One podcast. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Gates, and this is a show where we talk about creativity, leadership, design, I don't know, we're all over the place with this thing. Anyway, we talk about a bunch of cool stuff that seems to help out a lot of people, so glad you're along for the ride. So, as always, if you like the show, listen to the show, do things like that. Feel free to leave a review, tell a friend, take out a billboard, post it on LinkedIn. Do something to be able to help people out, because I'd like to think that what we're sharing here might actually help some people. And so usually that only happens when people can hear it. To that end, today I want to talk about what probably recently has become my number one piece of advice. And this is the number one piece of advice that I give to leaders of all levels of seniority. This is the number one piece of advice I give to people that are going through sort of a transition. They want to do something different. Look, this is probably the biggest piece of advice I give to people that are just trying to do almost anything. And the reason why I give this piece of advice is I think if you want to do something new, if you want to go in a different direction, if you want to start taking on something challenging, the hardest part of it is always the beginning. And I think that the interesting part for so many of us is that if you are creative, we're really good at taking a problem and be able to break it down and build it out into steps and figuring out how do I want to go about things, and then off we go. But whenever it comes to us, whenever it comes to our careers, our personal lives, and other things like that, all of a sudden, things get a little bit cloudier. And, most of the mentoring sessions that I do and most of the conversations that I have are somebody wants to make a change. They want to go in a different direction in their career. They want a promotion. They want something, and they can't figure out a couple problems. Usually they can't figure out, one, have I figured out enough to get started? Two, how do I actually get started? Because it feels like it is just overwhelming, right? There's so many different possibilities, so many questions, so many problems. How do I get all this figured out? In a lot of ways, how do I find some level of certainty to know that what I'm about to do is the right thing? All of these are natural questions. I think all of these are natural anxieties. All of these are things that make a whole bunch of sense when you're going to start taking on something big. But I think that the one commonality that I see for so many people whenever they're going through and setting about this is whenever it comes to that level of certainty, there's a feeling that I don't know enough. I haven't figured out enough. I haven't researched enough. Or that there's not a point where I'm like, okay, right? Like I feel confident enough. And so I think there's sort of two things to talk about here. The first thing, and this is the biggest piece of advice that I give people, is that whenever you're in those moments, and honestly, if you're a leader, if you're doing anything creative, in those moments where you say, look, I've got a big problem to solve, I think too many people feel like they can't move or they can't lead unless they have all the answers. And that's not realistic. Because in those moments, what are we doing, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that basically what we're up against is a design challenge. And we're really good at that. We're really good at figuring that out. So let's start to think about these moments like a design challenge. And whenever you have a design challenge and you want to go and create something, you don't have all the answers, right? What you need is a plan. And I think this is where so many people get hung up. Because in that moment when you want to go lead people to a project, you want to go do something new, you want to make a change, in that moment you need a plan, not the answer. And I think for so many of us, we feel like I don't know enough. I haven't figured out enough. I don't know whatever that is. And if we just shift that perspective to look at this like a design challenge and say, okay, what I need to do in my plan is to map out what am I going to go do? What are the questions I'm going to go ask? What are the research I'm going to go do? What are the things that I need to figure out? And give yourself the grace and the patience to go through the process. Because for so many of us, we're not going to know what the answers are. We're not going to know what the experience should be. We're not going to know what it is that we should go do until we actually do it. And that moment of insecurity, that moment of feeling like I don't have enough answers, is the moment when so many people get stuck. Because they're like, I don't know enough. I don't have enough. I don't have all the answers. And that's, you got to rewire your brain, right? Because in that moment, what you need to say is like, okay, what is my plan to figure this out? Because fundamentally, in a lot of ways, a big part of leadership is just having a plan. It's saying like, look, we're going to go this way. And then we're going to look at this, and we're going to look for that, and we're going to walk towards this, and we're going to do whatever that is, and we're going to figure out what the resources are along the way or whatever, right? It's not, and I think a lot of the leaders who aren't great leaders are the ones in that moment where they need to feel like they need to talk in certainty, that they can't be human. And I think that, look, people are looking for reassurance, but what they're looking for is that there is a plan. And if you just kind of throw out a bunch of answers and everybody's sitting there going like, yeah, that doesn't feel right or that doesn't feel real, then people know. And all of a sudden they're like, I'm not sure I trust this leader. But I think that's one of the first things to think about in these moments is like, look, what you need is a plan, not the answer. And I can't tell you the number of people that I talk to in mentorship sessions and things like that, that whenever they hear that advice, you can see the physical relief in their body language that they aren't doing it wrong or fucking it up or like that they aren't somehow different, that like it's okay to go on the journey, to figure it out, and then to be able to say, okay, look, I've got a plan. The plan's going to adapt. This is what I'm going to do, but it's that bias towards action. And look, and I think that's the other part of this. Because for me, if I sit down with myself at the end of the day, when I'm laying in bed at night and like it's sort of dark and those sort of things, and I'm just sitting there thinking about things, if I'm being really honest with myself, look, I'm not the most creative person in the world. I'm not the best designer in the world. I would like to think that I'm above average, but I think that one of my superpowers is my ability to just have the bias towards action and in a lot of cases just jump, right? Whether it's popular, whether it's not, it's just to say, okay, look, I'm going to jump and I'm going to figure it out as I go. Where I think for a lot of other people, there's that moment where they get caught in the hesitancy, the insecurity, they do some of those sort of things, and then they don't take the leap. Because, come on, let's take this show, for example. If I thought about this rationally, what was it, 7 years ago, 8 years ago? I don't know. However long ago it was that we started this show, it's been a while. That if I sat down and thought about that, and if I said, okay, look, let's think about this logically. Does the world need another podcast from some middle-aged white guy who thinks like he's got everything figured out or he's got something to say about what this is? The empirical data would say no, right? The world is full of that stuff. Like it's not, nobody's going to listen. Nobody's going to care if you think about it that way. Now, it sort of sounds funny and a little bit ridiculous to say it out loud, but this is often the voice that's going on in our head. And so I think that's the other part of it, is in whatever way you can and whatever way you are comfortable with, just having that bias towards action and starting. Because I think for too many people, they become more afraid of what they think will happen without actually letting it happen. This is that old line about like the fear of the act is always greater than the act itself. That whatever you think is going to happen is probably far worse than what actually will, but you're never really going to know until you go do it. And so I think that giving yourself, like I said, just that mental space and grace to sit down and say, okay, this is what the plan's going to be, have a bias towards action of like actually going out and starting to work on it, and then letting yourself go through the process, because we all have the skills to figure things out. We have the skills to pivot and be creative and get advice and know what we're good at or know that what we're not, but you got to walk the road. And I think just being afraid of the road or what the road could be, and I mean, I literally had a conversation with somebody the other day, and they kept going, what if? And it's just, what if a bus runs into my house? What if a meteor crashes? Like, you can just sort of what if until the cows come home. I think if you were sitting down and you're doing that right level of thinking, right? Because on the one hand, this is where I will warn against. This is also why I think some stupid people are successful, because they're just not encumbered by these things, right? They just jump, and then they figure it out. And if they smash into the ground and blow up, then it's like, great. They put themselves back together, and they run back up the building, and they jump in a different direction because they aren't encumbered by that fear. Where I think for a lot of creatives and things like that, the people that are more empathetic and a little bit more thoughtful, this often is what stops us, because we're just sitting here going like, I don't know what I should do. And just have that bias towards action. I think just giving yourself that simple moment of grace and just putting the plan together and start moving will make a titanic difference, a huge Titanic's bad reference here. Titanic sank. Titanic's bad reference. Scratch that. It would just make a huge difference in what it is the outcome's going to be. And I think, again, just start to think about things that way, frame things in that way, and I think you're going to be able to find that you're going to be able to do a lot more things, to start a lot more things and have a bigger impact, and then your confidence will grow out of that. Give it a try. Just start to think about things that way and see where it goes. And like I said, I think that ultimately that's the difference between crazy and stupid, right? Stupid just does whatever. I think crazy are the people that have a plan, that take the risk, that have a bias towards action, that try it and then just figure it out, right? Because look, at the end of the day, this isn't like grade school or something's going in your permanent record. If it doesn't work, great, learn from it. It's only a failure if you don't learn. And then just keep on moving down the road. But try that out. Try thinking about things that way. See if it makes a difference. I think that it will. And again, thanks for listening to the show. I know I always appreciate the support and everything else. Hope this helps. And as always, stay crazy.